I'm going to propose we take stock of where we are. We've done a great job to get us to here. And if we can survive the peak, great. But we now need to rethink this whole supply chain management problem. We do need to start thinking about how do we protect ourselves from other challenges. It may be a pandemic over the last year or two, but it may be other things which can be substantiated by the phrase border closed. There's a disruption in the feeding of product and all global transportation systems. The first one is we have to start thinking about collaboration. So we need to really open up ourselves to a much more truthful, honest, open dialogue with ourselves, and just demonstrated that you can actually horizontalize the supply chain and make much more effective decisions. But we now need to take that out to the market, out to our suppliers, and share the information, share our expectations, share our measurement systems that we judge success by. And within that, we need to rethink, how do we measure success? We need to have a whole new set of metrics, and we need to share that sense of performance with our supply base, both in terms of what our target is and how we're doing against that, and not to be ashamed of that. Welcome, and thank you for joining me today. My name is Gary Newberry. I'm a senior executive on call, helping businesses in the make, move, sell flow of consumer goods and services. My purpose is to inspire business leaders, particularly those within the consumer products and retailing space, to think big, be bold, scale, adapt and win, one epic supply chain transformation at a time. There's additional content available through my website, RetailAID.ca, or on my YouTube channel, RetailAID. Be sure to check it out. As the business world faces much volatility, uncertainty, complexity and ambiguity, organizations need to be tapping into resources with an inside edge on transitioning their teams to be agile, innovative and digital, with thought leaders, experts and senior executives who have mastery of operational turnarounds and strategic transformations to help reorientate their enterprises. There's great material to get through here, so let's get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Retail Council of Canada's Retail West Forum. My name is Diane Brisebois. I'm the President and CEO of Retail Council of Canada, and so delighted to be able to join you today. This year has been a very challenging one for all of us in the industry. Many Canadian consumers and retailers aren't sure what to expect going forward. This is why we wanted to bring the Western community together to explore the latest retail marketing developments, insights, and innovations to help position your brand for growth and success. We'll discover the latest research strategy for maintaining strong teams, supply chain challenges, how to deal with those, experiential retail from some of the industry's brightest professionals who will be joining us throughout the program. As always, Retail Council of Canada is here for you.
Our next session is sponsored by Penguin Pickup. Please welcome the President, Patrick Jobin, to the stage. Patrick, welcome.
Thank you, Michael. So before I introduce our panelists for the next session, just like to give a few words about Penguin Pickup. We are a provider of cost-effective, sustainable, and innovative last-mile delivery solutions in Canada. We have a network of physical pickup locations to address the last-mile delivery inefficiencies which many of us are experiencing. The model provides retailer with a high-efficient, centralized delivery options in high-density urban areas such as Toronto, Montreal, and I'm glad to say that we will have our first store in Vancouver and the first out of many in early 2022. So looking forward to share more in the near future. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists, Jeff Starneman with London Drugs, Gary Newberry from RetailAID, and David Ian Gray of Dig 360. They'll be discussing how supply chain challenges are no longer a matter of picking up the phone to find out an alternate partner, but as a matter of teams coming together to evaluate challenges and opportunities. So to start us off, please welcome Gary to provide an overview of the sector and the roots of the challenges.
I'll do a very quick intro in that I'm sitting here as a advisor to retail. I run a firm that focuses on supporting transformation, and our focus has generally been putting the customer at the center. We've been very customer centric in our approach. And here I am, maybe for the second time in 4 years, being involved in a supply chain discussion. I'm hoping very much that the audience here for this is not simply logistics people trying to get a handle on things, but it's marketers, it's owners, it's CEOs, people from other parts of the retail business. Because I think the reality now is, if we are going to talk about improving customer centricity and customer experience, like the two most important factors right now that are getting disrupted are employees, and of course the other one is supply chain disruption. And both of these are no longer sort of back of house issues where we deal with store functionalities and omni bells and whistles. These are fundamental: employee engagement, how the employees are in store or in your head office interacting and supporting, and how supply chain is getting your product to you. These are the issues right now. And I think, although Jason said we have customer centricity rife in our lives as shoppers, I think the honest truth is right now we're putting up with a few things, and we're going to be patient for a little while, which gives you guys a chance to get your act together. So this should be a real good session, not just on the nuts and bolts of supply chain, but also how it affects the organization. And we did want Gary to lead off this. Also my co-host for the Business of Retail podcast. So I know Gary quite well, but he's done an ongoing deep dive on this issue and was early flagging some of this. So Gary, can you give us a scene set? Let's look back before we start looking forward.
Thank you, David. I think we may agree the pandemic has brought into sharp focus the challenges with our end-to-end retail supply chain network designs, and in particular, the lack of flexible response of geographically extended supply networks when unexpected circumstances occur. The trade war between the US and China during 2017 to 19, and to a degree between the US and Canada, and the decelerating demand trend for 2018-2019, followed by the impacts of the pandemic lockdowns and restrictions. These factors clearly revealed how delicately poised global trade patterns have become, supported by supply chains with little to no tolerance for unexpected and significant volume, channel, and category swings. Basically, as the impacts of lockdowns spread globally, these long, complex, and let's call it efficient, just-in-time supply chains have shown very little resilience. With a litany of tactical setbacks, including the Texas winter storm, Suez Canal, cyber attacks, etc., but most importantly, social distancing and COVID closures at key nodes such as factories, ports, rail hubs, and across surface transportation networks. The unhelpful disposition of containers caused through an original blank sailings, which very quickly shifted to rollovers. The strategic challenges appeared with clarity very quickly. Now, 20 months after the start of the pandemic here in Canada, we continue to have shortages, sharply rising prices of commodities and transportation, capacity constraints on most elements of supply networks, delays in processing through ports, and a risk of strategically impactful labour action. There has been much turmoil which retail supply chains have not been able to tackle very well. The fault line was created many, many years ago with a focus on cost modelling to achieve efficiency at sourcing, at transportation, within storage, and within final distribution, all very much siloed with very little regard to the overall coordination and risk management. As a reaction to some of these adverse impacts, several retail businesses are exploring options to pull up sticks and bring production much closer to their domestic market. However, they face a realization the infrastructure, capacity, and/or skill base simply may not be there without significant investment or a time delay of many, many months, if not years. Facing performance challenges from current supply chain network designs, most of which were developed in the 1990s, can you believe that? These designs are failing to live up to the speed of a consumer who demands instant gratification, whether or not that is in-store or online. In today's disrupted times, I would argue, these designs have created havoc, waste, sticker shock, daily disruption, an unusually high level of expediting, and importantly, a faltering of customer confidence and potentially lifetime value as we struggle through these challenging times. So, David, would you like to take us through the next piece?
Gary, it sounds like we're ready for a pretty blue sky optimistic chat, but we'll get there. So we have a little reality we have to deal with. So Jeff, I got to know you as we prep for this. I did a little work through 2020 with Clint and your team and other parts of the business. I was blown away at how London Drugs was responding to things there, even more so with your some of your stories. I think it'd be great if you could share with this audience how you reacted almost in triage mode, reacting on the fly to some of the things that were coming at you. And maybe some of those stories could be inspiring or good tips for some of the others that are dealing with things still today.
Sure, absolutely, David. Thanks for giving me the opportunity. I think I'll go just briefly off script for a moment and do a little shout out for the shipping lines and the customer-centric approach. For many years, as customers, retailers, or anyone who is doing shipping and importing, we were trying to drive the prices as low as possible and put these companies in very difficult situations and trying to demand as a customer. And part of that made the whole ecosystem more fragile. So what started to happen is, even pre-pandemic, we started seeing some price increases and delivery reliability issues. And we, as a relatively small retailer compared to the behemoths like Walmart or Amazon or Home Depot, moving maybe 800, 900, 1,000 containers annually, we needed to increase our size to get some pricing and priority. So we joined in with an alliance of other retailers to try to strengthen our position. It seemed to be working initially, and then, of course, pandemic and other issues occurred, and we've now seen prices where we've paid $3,000 for a container to as much as $22,000 for a container. We've been impacted by over 30 blank sailings. We've seen about a 70% on-time fulfillment rate. And quite frankly, in the months of February and August of this year, we almost got nothing moved. We've seen ports closed for weeks due to COVID, or entire countries like Vietnam or Cambodia shut down for the better part of the year. We've ended up using multiple freight forwarders to move our products and having to weigh premiums against seasonal sensitivity. Quite frankly, Easter baskets aren't going to move very well in July. Air conditioners don't move so well in October. And Christmas in February just isn't a thing. We're having to book months earlier than before and still having products delivered 2 months after the expected delivery date. We're seeing swings of what used to be 2 months to or less from booking to delivery to 4, 5, 6 months. We're also seeing containers coming in unreliably. We might go a week or two where nothing comes in due to blank sailings, et cetera, and then see 30 or 40 containers all in a week, overwhelming our ability to de-stuff the containers, and ironically followed up with calls from drayage companies saying a fine will come if we don't get the chassis available. Meanwhile, we're like, well, where were you over the last month while we were waiting for the product? And lastly, right now off the coast of Vancouver Island, we got freight on board of a vessel that's on fire. Well, the fire's put out, thankfully, but our freight is still on board. So it's been quite the year and lots of challenges. But I'd like to say that we've had a real fantastic team here at London Drugs looking for creative ways to make product move. We had a situation earlier this year, I spoke of air conditioners. There's a time to sell air conditioners, and quite frankly, it's June and July. Most people by August, they don't want it anymore. They think they'll make it through the rest of the summer. So you need them when you need them. We ended up, due to COVID outbreak in salmon at the time, we ended up trucking product from salmon to Nancha to get it on board of a ship. Something we'd never done before. And quite frankly, something we were unable to do even a couple of months later because of the backups at the ports. You couldn't even get at the containers to try to put them on a truck and move them around based on ports being closed as a result of COVID. But that was a fire and a great team that got on top of this and saw an opportunity, and we had help from our freight forwarders. We've also had to source more product like air conditioners, again, another example of air conditioners where we were getting refurbished air conditioners up out of California. But that involved us having to figure out how to truck them to Vancouver in a pandemic, which again, we were able to do. It's been a really challenging time. I'm really proud of how the teams reacted And I think we're doing all right.
You know, there's a triage aspect to this, right? Like, we're not in MBA mode right now. And I'm sure the listeners, the viewers have shared their stories of reaction, slap some duct tape on, or hustle, and definitely do a shout out. If you've got as we go along, Jeff, if there's any other sort of high five moments, definitely use the opportunity to share them. And by the way, for the people viewing right now, if you want to use the chat, there's not really a structured format for Q&A, but if you want to share some of your stories in the chat or pop a comment up, you go right ahead. What about, Jeff, then the elongation within the elastic effect inside the company? So you're dealing with the product side. What were some of the impacts across the organization outside of your group?
Sort of jumping ahead a little bit of solution providing, something that we've done as an organization, and it was really quite frankly foresight from Clint, again speaking to the president of our organization, that when my role was created, I was given supply chain operations. I wasn't warehousing, I wasn't distribution. I was asked to cut through the organization and go everything from sourcing all the way to customer delivery, whether that involves e-commerce or pickup at the store. And so then that allowed me to align with merchandising or finance or e-commerce or warehousing and transportation to get the job done. And it's really allowed perspective within an organization to bridge some of these gaps. And when you're having to evaluate a $22,000 container cost, can you make the margin? Well, is it even worth doing? Is there a fine associated? And when we were starting to look at things like that, we had to link our buyers up with analysts in our finance department so that we could run the numbers. Things that we'd never had to do before, but we needed professional accountants helping us to make good decisions. And my role and the way that our company moved our vision towards supply chain allowed us to put the right people in connection with each other.
Well, and I think the ripple effect on through the organization, I don't believe your front lines are so commission-based, but I imagine if you're in appliance sales and you've got a motivated buyer standing in front of you and you're the best salesperson there is, and you're having to tell them they have to come back maybe in a month, maybe much longer, it must have a knock-on impact on the front lines. And Gary, I don't know if you've sort of noticed that, like how are some of the other departments getting whacked with what Jeff's dealing with and his colleagues in other companies?
Yeah, certainly been talking to a few retailers, and one of them had gone from a couple of months lead time, and it was in furniture, had gone out to at least 26 weeks, and they were commission based. So you can imagine the motivational issues there and the impact on those people. And I'm sure they're going to be part of the great reshuffle, if not the great resignation at some point. But I think to Jeff's point that I've been advocating a horizontalization of a supply chain for such a long time. Many of the functions which naturally fall to the supply chain are often tucked in merchandising, some in stores, some in other departments, and that needs to be brought in. And Jeff has really demonstrated that you don't need a pandemic to do this, but it makes it a lot easier if your organization is horizontalized and you've got a leader on the top of it who can help make those clear decisions rather than finding yourself battling with silos and working with different people who have different budgets, different expectations. But the end-to-end supply chain, certainly within the organization, and if we look outside the organization, how we manage suppliers and potentially suppliers, this is a process of which we deliver value to consumers. And that's quite contentious for people with a stores bent or a merchandising bent, but that's all about trying to create the need in the business. It's a supply chain that actually delivers. And if we're not clear about that by now, through 20 months of this, it should be very clear to everybody in retail. It is the performance of the supply chain that makes all the difference to that customer.
Well, let's come back on that in a second. I think the notion is that everyone got rocked. And by the way, with a complex system like this, when there's a shakeup somewhere, we can't always predict how it evolves. And in March 2020, I don't know if we knew this was going to be the issue, but it is now. So we're on our heels, we're coming off our heels, getting through it, and then thinking, yeah, there could be systemic change. So we'll talk about the systemic change shortly. I think probably what a lot of people joining the session are interested in right here, right now, we're coming up on Christmas and holiday, and we've got an in moment now.
I'm going to burst straight in, David, if you
Yeah.
don't mind, and Jeff.
Yeah, go ahead.
Frankly, if it's not already at a port, you're struggling to get stuff on the shelves into distribution centres and out to stores for peak. Because if it's stuck outside the port, particularly if you're coming into potentially Los Angeles, Long Beach, you're in a long queue. And even the fact that the ship is so close to the port, it means nothing, because you could be in that queue for 3 or 4 weeks and it still takes a week to unload your container if it's in a rather large ship. And then you've got to find a driver to do the drayage, get it onto railhead, get it to a DC, etc. So I think that if you haven't got it under your control directly, you're in some trouble for peak. So start planning on what you've got, including what's been in your warehouse for a little while, and find a way of getting it out onto the shelf, tell a story about it, and get the stores involved.
Jeff, how are you guys? I mean, that's a great kind of scene set for you. How are you dealing? Let's keep it right on the holiday season right now. You know, what's your prediction for you and London Drugs, and what do you feel about the sector briefly, and what are some of the moves you guys are making to address the issues?
Yeah, as far as London Drugs is concerned, I feel bullish. I think we're in pretty good shape. I think there's some areas that everyone's fairly well aware of, like toys and appliances, that have had some stumbles now in the last little while, and we're gonna bring value to what we do have to sell. We do have some opportunities to pass along to consumers in those areas, and so we'll certainly do our very best to have that. As far as staples and the things you can count on from London Drugs, we have pretty strong supply chain in those areas, so that's going well for us. There's things like audio equipment that's still challenged to get, but TVs coming up from Mexico, it's going to be a very strong year for televisions. There's a lot of new technology, a lot of availability. I would certainly encourage someone, if you're looking for a TV, come by London Drugs, and we might be able to set you up. As far as other technology, laptops, we've seen a shortage of microchips, just to make things even worse. And so microchips have been going into more expensive computers for better retails and margins. And so we have those available, again, with strong London Drugs tech support behind that. So that'll be there. So consumers might not get exactly what they want, but I think they'll be very happy with what they do ultimately find. I just want to speak very quickly about an industry thing. I saw it this morning out of Forbes. And so there's a task force called the White House Supply Chain Disruption Task Force. I'm not sure how they fit that on one of those jackets, but they're saying that the total inventory in the US market is at 455 billion in retail, and it's actually higher than February of 2020. The shelf availability is sitting at 89%, which is down 2 from the pre-pandemic and 2% above January of the start of this year. So things aren't terrible. There's some things you can't get, but things aren't terrible.
Some people are in other categories, or they might be smaller. Some of the independents, as much as you're fighting to fight off the Walmarts and the Home Depots, we got independents looking up to you as a pretty big behemoth. But what are some of the things you've had to do that's different specifically for holiday that you're on right now?
So we started, and I know most people know that holiday bookings are a year out these days for a lot of products, but we started meeting actually at an executive and senior leader level as early as the summer, as early as July. We started asking ourselves questions: what will we have? What won't we have? What can we commit to? What can we advertise? What can we put in flyers and Christmas catalogs that we're booking well in advance? And we had to make some calls. We're going to have a few products that are going to be in our catalogs that we're not going to have, that we needed to put out there, that for relevancy is an area that we will participate in, even if we can't get it right now. So in doing so, we brought together marketing, merchandising, e-commerce, other parts of supply chain, warehousing, distribution, and even our president sat in on many of these meetings to find out what we were going to be able to do for this season. The other thing that you're seeing many of our competitors doing, and we're along in the same way, but not as big as some of them. You're seeing this 60-day price guarantee, and they're starting the holiday sales saying, yeah, there's supply chain challenges, get it now, and we'll guarantee your pricing throughout the season. So certainly some interesting movement.
That's great. So Gary, what's your thought about holiday? Let's start looking into the crystal ball a little bit. What are you concerned about?
Firstly, people need to be thinking about returns and having a solution for returns. Don't wait until January. Don't wait until Boxing Day to say it's a big heap. What do we need to do? And if you need some help with that, just reach out. My details will be with RCC. But we can take one or two views. And I've talked to a few retailers about the fundamental shift in how they look at their supply chain, and they're still very reticent about doing that. It's a bit more about doing what we've been doing, the triage, or 2019 on steroids. Keep going. This could happen another 18 months, another 2 years. The more projections I see, the more it's going into the far distance that we could be behaving like this for a long time. So I'm going to propose that we actually take stock of where we are. We've done a great job to get us to here, and if we can survive the peak, great, but we now need to rethink this whole supply chain management problem. We do need to start thinking about how do we protect ourselves from other challenges. It may be a pandemic over the last year or two, but it may be other things which can be substantiated by the phrase border closed. There's a disruption in the feeding of product and all global transportation systems. The first one is we have to start thinking about collaboration. And that doesn't mean, if I get a good deal, great, we're collaborating. If I get a bad deal, you're rubbish. I'm going to find somebody better than you. So we need to really open up ourselves to a much more truthful, honest, open dialogue with ourselves, and just demonstrated that you can actually horizontalize the supply chain and make much more effective decisions. But we now need to take that out to the market, out to our suppliers, and share the information, share our expectations, share our measurement systems that we judge success by. And within that, we need to rethink, how do we measure success? Is it comp store? No, I don't think so. We need to have a whole new set of metrics, and we need to share that sense of performance with our supply base, both in terms of what our target is and how we're doing against that, and not to be ashamed of that. I think one of the big changes, if you haven't already horizontalized your supply chain, you may need to bring in a resource, an interim chief supply chain officer, to reorientate the organization. Somebody who's pretty tough, who can actually grab these different aspects of supply chain and pull them into the supply chain, reorganize that, and hand over to a permanent person who can run it forward with the great expectations that you have of the business. I think that's probably enough to cope with for the next year, but we need to get to a much more agile mindset. We need to actually develop an agile supply chain base, and we actually need to digitize that. And they're quite big chunks of mental capacity and energy that we need to put into the business, but we must protect ourselves against cyber risks, pandemics, geopolitical tensions that might arise, the climate change. We need to find ways that we can continue our business beyond those major disruptions and risks of those major disruptions.
Jeff, just snappy answer for this one. How long do you think before we hit sort of a steady equilibrium again where we're in control?
I think snappy answer, we're probably more than a year away. We need to see the ships, the smaller ships, moving more as a system than they are right now. Until that happens, certainly as it relates to Trans-Pacific, I think we've got a little time ahead still.
Can I let Michael, if I could, I'd like to let Jeff sort of have the last word on this, because he's living it right now. As you look ahead, and you guys are already in play transforming, you've done your patching, but you're transforming. For the audience, what are one or two things fundamentally that they need to be reconsidering, either structurally or culturally inside the organization, that will lay that foundation to do what Gary's proposing?
Yeah, and I think Gary nailed it. You got to break down the silos. You got to get people working together. I have great teams and senior leaders in all these key areas, but they haven't been forced to work with each other this way in the past because they've been able to operate in the silos, and those days are ending when we have to factor in different costs, different timing. Left hand needs to know what the right hand's doing. If I'm going to do an inventory build up because of a supply chain issue, finance needs to know that we need some extra money. So everybody's got to talk to each other.
And I'll finish with a quick observation on London Drugs that the rest of you may take away, which is I know that your CEO was a chief supply chain officer at London Drugs prior to his role now. And I think there is something to be said about the top leader really being hands-on knowledgeable about this problem, because I think it is the biggest one facing the sector.
David, I think that's such a great point. I think everybody's a supply chain expert, but the real people who've been working in retail are going to be so invaluable for the next 18 months, right? As we kind of work through this. So Jeff, Gary, David, thanks so much for joining us. A great session. Idea for London Drug, Christmas in July. You heard it here first. Christmas in July promotion. And I do think the willingness for consumers to substitute, as you pointed out, over the next 18 to 24 months is going to be pretty paramount.
Thank you for listening today. I hope the information has been valuable for you and your team. You can connect with me via the website retail.ca and go to the contact page, or via LinkedIn by typing linkedin.com/in/last-mile. Look forward to hearing from you and playing an active part with your supply chain and your business's transformation as you start to act boldly, think big, scale, adapt, and win.